On the 3rd of April, 1882, America's most wanted man was not riding hard, guns blazing, or staring down a posse. Jesse James, legend of the West, was standing on a wobbly chair in the cramped parlor of a rented house in St. Joseph, Missouri, arms stretched up toward a dusty picture frame. His shirt clung to his back, sweat pooled along his hairline, and the aftermath of a greasy, unsatisfying breakfast sat heavy in his gut. This was not the heroic ending anyone imagined. Jesse James was about to make the most mundane and fatal mistake of his life. And his killers were already in the room, nerves stretched so tight you could practically hear them hum. The popular version of this story is a gunslinger's last stand, 2 pistols, defiant to the end. Reality was messier. A cramped room, forced small talk, stale air, and a house that smelled like outlaws had been living there too long. No high noon standoff. Just a man, routine, paranoia, and the wrong company at the worst moment. The legend shrivels when you get close to the physical details. Sticky shirts, cheap food, the wrong glance at the wrong time. Let's set the stage. Jesse James is only 34, but years of war, wounds, and running have aged him hard. By now, the infamous James gang is destroyed. His old friends are dead or locked up. The Pinkertons, those early private detectives, recently torched the James family home, left his mother maimed, and killed his half-brother. Jesse's been sleeping badly, hiding out, switching names, trusting almost no one. But this spring morning, the Ford brothers, Robert and Charles, share his table. The 3 men, sometimes joined by Jesse's wife Zerelda, had been crammed into this rented house for days. The air is thick with pretend normalcy. They pretend this is just another morning. Everyone knows it isn't. Imagine the world's most awkward breakfast, mismatched plates, weak coffee, cold bread, or eggs fried in leftover lard. Nobody talks much. Jesse's eyes flick between the Ford brothers, searching for a hint of betrayal. The Fords avoid his gaze, pushing food around, sweat prickling at their temples. If there's any talk, it's about the weather or chores. Never the reward on Jesse's head, never the secret deal the Fords are making with the governor. It's physically miserable. Jesse's shirt is probably the same one from yesterday, maybe the day before. A little sour under the arms, scratchy from lye soap. The house is stuffy. Spring sun heats the parlor. He wipes his brow, shifts in his seat. Every creak and clink gets amplified. The scrape of a boot, the thud of a mug, the distant rumble of a carriage outside. Was Jesse suspicious? Did he sense what was coming? Sources disagree. Some say he'd grown careless after years running. Others think he was still sharp, just unlucky with who was in the room that morning. Either way, paranoia and tension hang as thick as the Missouri humidity. Here's where routine turns risky. Maybe it's the muggy air, maybe a rare attempt at comfort, but Jesse makes a decision that should set off alarm bells for any outlaw. He takes off his gun belt and sets it aside, possibly on the bed in the next room. For once, he's unarmed. He notices the dusty picture on the wall. Up he goes on that rickety chair, back exposed, fussing over a smudge on the glass. The most famous outlaw in America brought low, not by a hail of bullets, but by a half-hearted attempt at spring cleaning. Right there, history pivots. The real question is, how did Jesse James, the man who lived by paranoia and routine, end up so exposed, so ordinary, and so dangerously vulnerable. Before the gunshot, before the blood and chaos, it's worth looking closer at the mundane details that set the stage. The hunger, the nerves, the bad clothes, the routines that led him straight to a fatal error. Jesse's last morning is all physical discomfort, not heroic legend. His hands, unsteady, grip a cheap wooden frame. Dust coats his fingers. There's a moment's pause. Does he bother to finish cleaning or just give up? For a man who spent life riding hard and dodging bullets, this little smudge becomes the most important thing in the world. Sometimes, fussing over something you can control is all you have left, and sometimes that's the thing that gets you killed. Outlaw life, it turns out, isn't all train heists and galloping getaways. Sometimes it's just sweat, grime, and a stubborn streak of glass you can't quite polish clean. Behind him, the Ford brothers are doing a terrible job pretending to be casual. Charles picks at his bread. Robert's leg bounces under the table, heel thumping a nervous rhythm. The tension is so thick you'd need a saw to cut it. This is the breakfast of the damned. No one wants seconds. If you're picturing Jesse, forget the dime novel cover. He's in yesterday's shirt, dust and sweat, maybe a metallic tang from months of living half wild. His trousers are sagging. Laundry isn't really an option when you're wanted in 3 states. His collar sticks to his neck, and every movement is just a little heavier than the last. There's a cold basin in the corner and a cracked bar of soap, but maybe he didn't even bother this morning. The stubble scratching his jaw isn't exactly heroic. This isn't the Hollywood version. The outlaw glamour fades fast when you're living on borrowed time. Real Jesse is tired, dirty, and more than a little touchy about his hygiene. Honestly, if there's anything funny about it, it's the practical kind. America's most wanted, brought down by a dusty picture and a shirt that could stand up by itself. If only Jesse had been pickier about breakfast company. Every outlaw knows you don't take your guns off, not unless you're sure. For Jesse, it's the calculation of a man who's exhausted, sweating in his own parlor, and desperate to believe, just for a minute, that normal life isn't out of reach. Frank is gone, the old gang is scattered, and the Pinkertons have already left his family in ruins. These are not the good old days. So when Jesse removes that gun belt, lays it aside, and climbs up on that chair, he's stepping out of his own myth. No guns, no mask, nothing left but a man, a streak of dust, and the Ford brothers' restless eyes tracking every move. The silence is prickly. Charles glances at Robert. Robert glances at the door. Both are sweating, but only one is thinking about murder. There's a moment, almost a heartbeat, when you could believe nothing will happen. The day might pass quietly. Jesse might eat a bad lunch, complain about the newspaper, step out into the sun, but the legend is already closing in. Every clatter, every sideways glance, every twitch in the Ford brothers' posture says otherwise. Even as Jesse wipes the glass and squints at his own reflection, the room is shrinking, the tension thickening, and the trap is closing. What does it feel like to finally let your guard down after years of violence and betrayal? Relief? Exhaustion? Or is it just a split-second's distraction? Whatever it was, this is the moment history hinges on. Not the bullet yet, but the decision, the trust, the weight of habit pressing down on a man who survived everything except routine. Hollywood would have you believe this was a showdown. Guns drawn, fatal stares, slow-motion heroics. The reality? Sticky shirts, stale air, weak coffee, and murder hiding under a layer of domestic chores. The most wanted man in America, murdered in the act of dusting. It's almost funny, if it weren't so tragic. But that moment of grim humor vanishes fast because the consequences are real. Every detail, the worn shirt, the sweat, the dust, the half-eaten food, the silence is either a threat or an opportunity. Jesse's last hours aren't a grand exit, but a slow, awkward slide into vulnerability and betrayal. The wrong company, the wrong routine, and you could wind up the same. Right at the midpoint, Jesse's guns are off, his back is turned, and his mind is on nothing more dangerous than a streak on the glass. The legend is hanging by a thread. All his vigilance, all his rules, undone by the hope of something normal for just a few minutes. And then the room unfreezes. The gunshot cracks through wood and wallpaper, loud enough to rattle dust from the rafters. For an instant, everything is still. Jesse half-turned, confused, hands still reaching for the glass, and then his knees buckle. He folds in on himself, all that weight and fear hitting the floor in one graceless heap. No dramatic pose, just an awkward sprawl, blood already pooling beneath his jaw, seeping between the boards. The smell of blood, thick, metallic, animal, fills the air. The Ford brothers stand over him, hands shaking, faces pale and wild-eyed. They don't look like heroes. They look exactly like what they are, two desperate, sweaty men in a hot room trembling beside the corpse of America's most hunted outlaw. For a moment, there's nothing but the drip of blood and the sound of uneven, ragged breathing. Maybe Zerelda comes running in, screams echoing through the thin walls. Maybe the neighbors press in, drawn by the promise of a payday or just morbid curiosity. The legend of Jesse James ends not with a gunfight, not with lawmen, but in a mess of everyday household chaos. And it gets worse. Word spreads lightning fast, even without telephones. By sundown, the house is surrounded, curious, greedy, grieving, all mixing in the yard. Jesse's body lies on display, pale, blood crusting in his hair, cheap shirt torn and stained. People crowd in for a look, hoping for a souvenir or a story to sell. Flies gather, buzzing around his mouth and the wound at the base of his skull. The air turns thick, sweat, blood, that unmistakable reek of death. It's not a somber vigil, it's a sideshow. Within hours, newspapers start polishing the legend. Some say Jesse died bravely. Others claim he begged or wept. Some just print, "The outlaw is dead." His corpse is poked and prodded, sometimes for a fee. There are rumors about how he fell, the color of his eyes, even whether this was really him. But in that stuffy Missouri parlor, there's no mystery. Just a crumpled, bloodied body, a few coins in his pocket, and a life ended by a split-second mistake and a friend's betrayal. That's the con of all cons. Jesse James's death wasn't a showdown. It wasn't noble or cinematic. It was awkward, ugly, and quick. A domestic disaster, bad breakfast, dirty shirts, and a fatal lapse in suspicion. The legend grew only after the blood had dried. Hollywood can keep its duels at high noon. The actual Jesse James died, cleaning the house in the sticky heat, surrounded by nervous companions, and the most ordinary mayhem you can imagine. So next time you wonder about the real Jesse James, not the myth, remember the sticky air, the awkward breakfast, the dust on the glass, and that moment of trust that cost him everything. The most dangerous day isn't when the posse's at the door. It's the last ordinary morning, when you finally let your guard down. and the people at your table are the ones who finish the job. Thanks for watching. If you want more stories that pull the legend down to the bone, grit, blood, bad hygiene, and all, subscribe and check out our other Outlaw episodes. And next time someone mentions a gunfight at high noon, remember, the most famous outlaw in America died cleaning the house.